Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Abi Ishola. The Boston Globe is struggling. The San Francisco Chronicle is downsizing. And even the venerable New York Times is cutting back. And those are publications that have survived. It seems that at every turn, mainstream papers are lamenting the loss of competitors or compatriots.
But ethnic media have a somewhat different story to tell. While their mainstream counterparts have been folding up, ethnic newspapers have been able to survive these tough economic times.
On this edition of Independent Sources, we explore this topic with two ethnic media publishers.
We go on a journey to the Algerian desert with one of our producers as she discovers people who need to make news.
We hear about a hot topic in the blogosphere: love, marriage, and matchmaking in the Orthodox Jewish community. And we profile a Spanish-language television station that's outlasted some competitors to become a leader in the Latino community.
All that and News of the Week when we come back.
The ethnic media is the voice of New York City. It is what is happening on the street, in the casas, in the barrios, in the community centers, in the schools. It is the voice of what's happening, and that's why it's important, because we can't begin to understand New York City and what we need to function as New York City without hearing from the ethnic communities.
When the Christian Science Monitor replaced its daily printed edition with an online version in April, media observers lamented that the writing was on the wall. Publishers, desperate to keep their publications afloat, were trying to figure out the formula to make money on the web. But as mainstream newspapers faltered, many ethnic papers maintained their peak circulation. Here to discuss this with me are Eleanor Tatum, publisher of the Amsterdam News, and Roberto Lima, publisher of the Brazilian Voice. Welcome. Before we start, let's take a look at this report from producer Zyphus Lebrun about how some ethnic papers are managing to not stop the presses.
It seems that nearly every week, mainstream newspapers are lamenting the death of print journalism as we know it. But here at community papers like the Manhattan Times, it's a very different story. The Manhattan Times is a weekly bilingual paper that serves Washington Heights and Inwood. The paper has an overall circulation of 40,000. However, its 15,000 circulation in northern Manhattan is significantly more than other larger papers like the New York Post, Daily News, and El Diario.
With the decline of circulation among the Daily News, the New York Post, the New York Times, my circulation hasn't declined. My readers want more. If I could afford to print more newspapers, I would print more newspapers, and I would not be picking them up at the end of the week.
That's because many immigrant communities have growing populations whose major news source is still the newspaper. This familiarity with the old-school print paper and the fact that these publications are reporting local news is what's sustaining the audience, an audience that draws advertisers.
So if you're an advertiser in those newspapers, you have the opportunity to do geo-targeting because it is a neighborhood, or you have the ability to do culturally specific targeting because there is a specific culture that you're addressing with those newspapers too.
Ray says though some community papers like Ming Pao Daily have closed and Oi now only publishes online, there has been a steady growth in ethnic and community newspapers in New York over the last 15 years. In the last 2 years, the number of ethnic papers has grown from 123 to 140. Ray says the hubbub about print being dead is coming from debt-burdened mainstream media, not the ethnic media that never had an exorbitant budget to begin with.
The 80s and the 90s were periods of acquisition for lots of large newspaper corporations, and they saddled themselves with so much debt that no matter how profitable those newspapers are today, they can't service the debt. Ethnic newspapers are a little bit better positioned to handle the bad economic times because they never had the large advertisers to begin with, so they don't have them to lose.
That's not to say that ethnic papers have not been losing advertisers. Abu Taher is the executive editor at Bangla Patrika, a 15,000 circulation paper that serves New York's Bangladeshi community. He says that his paper has definitely felt the pinch of advertisers pulling their ads.
So there is a huge account who paid us, I think, about $20,000 a year. But now they are paying, instead of $20,000, they are paying only $2,400.
Initially, those advertising cutbacks made Taher consider cutting his staff, but he and his partners could not bring themselves to fire staffers who were more like family than employees. So they lowered their ad rates to attract even smaller businesses.
If you get small advertisement, like one page, then instead of big advertisement, you are getting like $50, might be about 20 or 25 advertisement in one page. They are not getting pinched because it's a small amount, but you are getting benefit out of it, you know.
It's that sort of ingenuity that leads Ray to think that ethnic media will survive the current economic crisis. She says their mainstream counterparts just need to find a way to do the same.
Newspapers don't have an audience problem, and I want to make that very clear. Ethnic newspapers, mainstream newspapers, we don't have an audience problem. We have a revenue problem. And the online model for revenue does not yet exist. Nobody has figured that out. Somebody needs to help us figure that out.
That may set the stage for the next great debate about the ethnic media's survival. As these papers try to keep pace with the digital era, will a shift to the internet alienate the loyal first-generation immigrants who have kept the papers buoyant? And will that shift be able to attract more techno-savvy third and fourth generations who may not have picked up the printed edition? Zyphus Lebrun, Independent Sources.
Eleanor, last time you were on the show, you talked about having this Obama bump in your circulation at the Amsterdam News. Have you been able to sustain that increase?
Well, you know, it was such a special time in the history of the United States, and no, we aren't able to keep 200 plus circulation a week at the Amsterdam News. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to, and it's hopefully something that we will attain again. But, you know, it's difficult in this day and age with the print prices going up and newsstands almost seeming to be obsolete these days. I mean, it's harder and harder to find newspapers in general. But, you know, we're still holding our own. We don't plan to go anywhere.
Roberto, are ethnic publications really doing that much better than their mainstream counterparts?
I guess it's because of the format of the immigrant communities. You know, they are more interested in local news and in the relationship between communities from different places in America. That's how it rolls. And that is what is making us survive in these times of crisis. You know, they still have the interest, the focus on local news.
And no one else is covering it.
Why do you consider local news, Eleanor? I mean, is this just the Harlem community or the black community at large in the city?
Well, when I think of local news, I think of both. I think about what's happening on the corner of 135th Street, but I also think about what's happening in Compton.
Okay.
So it's a broader black community for at least the black media at the Amsterdam News. We do focus more on the New York City community, the 5 boroughs, northern New Jersey, southern Connecticut, Westchester. But we do cover things that are happening all over the country and all over the world if it has to do with people of color.
Roberto, how are you surviving? Who are your main advertisers? Have you experienced the same things that Abu Taher at the Bengal Patrika have, where you have to reduce rates or get more ads so you can get the same revenue?
We had to be more creative. You know, the big advertisers, we have them at times. You know, they advertise with ethnic newspapers for a certain amount of, you know, a period of time during the year, like 3 months campaign and stuff like that. They don't advertise like 12 months straight. We kind of lost them a little bit, but on the other hand, they're coming back. You know, after the last 12 months, and they're coming back, you know, slowly. But and the small business, you know, they still need the newspaper to be the channel to advertise their products. You know, so it doesn't change.
And now let's talk about the black media a little bit. I mean, Ebony Magazine just reported this week that is having serious financial problems. Is this divide we're discussing more along big versus small publications, magazines versus newspapers? What's the conflict here, if you will?
Well, I think it goes back to what Michelle Ray was saying about some of the larger publications saddling themselves with debt. That's exactly what happened with Ebony and Jet. But what's happened with the smaller publications, smaller ethnic publications, is we haven't had the collateral to make those huge loans to begin with, so that we have not expanded in that extent when we did have the money. And and at the same time, we have such lean operations to begin with that is both a blessing and a curse, because it means we all have to work harder, but it also means that when things get tight, it's harder to cut. But everyone is doing those cuts and making cutbacks and layoffs and whatnot.
And you were talking earlier about the way you're making ends meet with small advertisers. I mean, expound a bit on that.
We create situations, where they can advertise more. That is only one problem with that. When you put your prices down, when times change, it's going to be really tough to get them higher again. So we try not to go that low in the ball game, because we know we're gonna pay for that in the near future.
You have some national advertisers. Have you been able to maintain them, or are they cutting back tremendously? And have you been able to make up with categories like legal advertising?
We have had a lot of advertisers come to us and ask us to drop our rates. Okay. Even legal advertising has asked us to drop our rates, which we have not done. But for some of the, major corporations that we can see from the media that they are hurting, people have asked us to cut back. Major retailers and whatnot have asked us to cut our rates down, and with the understanding that they will go back up when the economy turns around.
Okay. Michelle was talking in the piece about newspapers in general have a revenue problem, not a readership problem. Do you agree with that?
I think it's that we have untrained people to be able to keep anyone's attention for more than 15 or 20 seconds. I mean, with the onslaught of media everywhere, whether it's the internet or whether it's television, they've created an attention span that they've lessened the attention span of the media consuming public to a point where I think it's getting very difficult to keep people's attention when they read a newspaper. But I still think they're interested in the content that's in there. We just have to figure out how to present it in a way that is easier for people to digest.
Should newspapers start emulating the ethnic or community model to survive the large daily ones? Can they do that? What do you think, Roberto?
I think it's doable, and if you take a look at the Brazilian media in the U.S., that is about 56 Brazilian newspapers in the U.S. right now, and the tendency is every one of them being more in his niche, more on his particular area. There is no Brazilian newspaper national with the national conception anymore. We had that in the past, but right now, like a New Jersey paper, concentrate its efforts in the state of New Jersey, in the New York, and so on.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I don't think that the quote-unquote mainstream can do the job that the ethnics and the community papers do at all. I mean, if you look at what News Corp has tried to do with buying up of all sorts of community newspapers, those community newspapers are floundering now. That we're doing very, very well because the big guys just do not know how to run community papers.
We'll have to leave it at that. Eleanor Tatum, Roberto Lima, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now here's Adiola Oladele with some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. The Irish Voice reports that international students with J1 visas are having a tough time finding jobs in New York City. Several of them from Ireland have applied to various bars, restaurants, and McDonald's for jobs. So far, they've had no luck. From the Haitian Times, columnist Elio Durandis says temporary protected status, or TPS, is not what Haitian immigrants need. Durandis made his remarks in light of recent demands from members of the Haitian community who want TPS for 30,000 Haitian immigrants. Those people were displaced by a series of hurricanes that struck the island last year. Amsterdam News reports that complaints against police officers in New York have gone up by 50% since 2007, according to the New York Police Department figures. Critics are saying cops are hardly disciplined when accused of using excessive force or when they engage in unnecessary behavior. And finally, the Jewish Forward reports that an unusual rock star is reaching out to young people who think Muslim rock is inconceivable. Salman Ahmad is originally from Pakistan. He sings hard rock mixed with Islamic poetry and devotions. Ahmad, who's also a medical doctor, is organizing a summer concert at the UN with Angelina Jolie to benefit 3 million people displaced by fighting in Pakistan. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Abi in the studio.
The International Sahara Film Festival is a project to raise awareness about the plight of refugees from a former Spanish colony, the Western Sahara. The festival has been around for 6 years and is sponsored by the Polisario Front, a rebel movement seeking the independence of the Western Sahara from Morocco. Producer Michelle García traveled to the desert and found that in this North Africa territory, news is a necessity.
نبغي هواك يرد الحنين.
This is Northern Africa, on the very edge of Algeria, in the Sahara Desert. Scattered across 5 camps live the Sahrawi refugees. This camp is named Tahba, the most remote, the most isolated, and usually the quietest. Until the artists and the foreigners rolled into town, and more tents went up, and the desert became a movie theater, the site of the Sahara Film Festival.
What if recent United States efforts to
4 nights watching movies under the African sky, Algerian films, documentaries, even Hollywood's biopic on Che Guevara. By day, documentary makers, volunteers from Spain, teach mostly young women the ropes of video production. Moilami wants to work behind the mic.
Para que la gente sepa de nosotros y que todo el mundo esté al tanto de lo que ocurre en los campamentos y que somos un pueblo. Quizás hay muchos pueblos que ni siquiera saben lo que es el Sáhara, ni saben nuestra situación política, ni saben nada acerca de nosotros.
They are the refugees from Western Sahara, in these camps since the 1970s, when war broke out between the invading Moroccan army and independence fighters, the Polisario Front. A ceasefire came with a UN-backed promise that the Sahrawi would vote on their future, become part of Morocco or an independent nation. That was 18 years ago, and still no vote. I ask her if she ever wakes up and wonders if the world has forgotten them.
A veces, claro, a veces nos preguntamos, pero Dios es el que controla todo y es el que decide todo. Y nosotros tenemos mucha fe en Dios y sabemos que Dios algún día va... Nunca, bueno, la gente puede olvidarse de nosotros, pero Dios nunca se olvida de nosotros.
But they do their part, she says, reporting the news even from the middle of the desert.
Sí, estamos viviendo en campamentos, pero tenemos noticias. Por ejemplo, el Festival de Cine es una noticia y también muy interesante que hay que llevarla a cabo. No es porque estemos viviendo en los campamentos, no podemos tener radio, no podemos tener televisión porque aunque estés viviendo en un desierto, hay noticias. Por ejemplo, ha pasado un pájaro hoy, entonces hay vida. Por ejemplo, donde hay vida hay noticias.
Her words remind me of something so fundamental, something we all share, whether in New York City or in the Sahara Desert. The news is really about making sure people aren't forgotten.
الفنانين
For Independent Sources, I'm Michelle García.
Matchmaking is an age-old practice in the Orthodox Jewish community where going forth and multiplying is promoted. But today, this system of pairing young people has its cynics and its supporters. Rachel Geizhals of the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism produced this next report. She tries to answer the question, Is there a matchmaking crisis in the community?
Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. Find me a find, catch me a catch.
Yenta the Matchmaker is one of the endearing characters in Fiddler on the Roof, a story about 19th century Europe. But today, in 21st century America, there are real-life Yentas who are very much alive and very much in demand. For ultra-Orthodox Jews, the matchmaker is as essential to marriage as the bride and groom. Without a matchmaker, boy and girl are not likely to meet, and that's just the first step in an important process. Rabbi Kenneth Auman explains that when singles are set up, there's always a higher purpose in mind.
The first commandment in the Bible is to be fruitful and multiply, have children, and populate the world.
But since sexual activity outside of marriage is not allowed, many want to marry young so they can start having children.
The pressure is definitely to get married, ideally as quickly as possible so you can begin a family. And depending on the community customs, it may be earlier or later. But as a rule, the earlier the better, and the more children the better.
But some feel the system makes dating too difficult. Seeing more older available singles, many ask, is there a matchmaking crisis? A crisis, because fewer matches and marriages are threatening to a religion that holds being fruitful and multiplying in such high esteem. But socializing between the sexes is not encouraged, and physical contact is forbidden. Boys and girls are separated at schools, camps, and even at weddings. Others can meet in school or at social events, but Orthodox Jews usually don't.
It's possible that a young man and woman might meet on their own in one of these settings, but it's not the norm. And therefore, to facilitate meeting, you need some kind of a system that is going to allow young people to meet.
That's why they have the shidduch, or matchmaking system. There are professionals, but really, anyone can do it. Ahuva Cherns is a professional matchmaker, or shadchan. She's made more than 40 matches, or shidduchim.
As a shadchan, the role is not just to set people up, but to really hear their needs, hear what's going on in the relationship. So if the relationship is meant to be, it can thrive and come and one day be successful.
Singles date with marriage in mind, so they begin when they feel they're ready for marriage. For girls, that can be as young as 19, guys, about 22. Adina and Yosef Zoyman have been married almost 3 years. They dated for 5 weeks, married 3 months later, had their first child 10 months later, and their second 16 months after that. The Zoyman's shadchan doesn't set up matches professionally.
I had a teacher there that I was very close with, and her family.
I had a friend, my father had a friend who lived in Israel, who they were old friends, so I used to go to him for Shabbos meals, and his daughter
was her
teacher.
And she set us up together.
They had a great experience, but many singles aren't so happy. There are no official statistics, but everyone says guys get tons of shidduch suggestions, while girls get fewer offers. Many matchmakers have more than twice as many eligible females in their files. Some attribute that to age differences. Popular blogger, Bad for Shidduchim, blogs about the pressures of the system. The phrase Bad for Shidduchim refers to the warning singles get, not to harm their reputation. She declines going on camera to preserve her anonymity.
Girls our age are always being told, don't go there, it's bad for shidduchim, don't do this, it's bad for shidduchim, don't wear that, it's bad for shidduchim, you have to behave a certain way because it's good for shidduchim.
Responses to Bad for Shidduchim's blog have been pretty positive.
It helps them realize that, this isn't the end of the world and they shouldn't take it so seriously if they happen to be single at the age of 19 and a half.
Some think it's not as bad as people say, but the sense of pressure and panic is constantly reinforced because shidduchim and marriage are such hot topics. A small minority of couples meet outside the shidduch system. Yehuda Solomon says a matchmaker doesn't have to be involved.
It doesn't have to be strict. So, people want to make it seem like it's a canonized process. Like, there's only one way to do it. And if you do it any other way, you'll be ostracized or you're just not being considered conventional. Good. You aren't being conventional. That's fine. But no one looks at you differently. No one looks at you askance for that.
The shidduch system has its critics and its flaws. But this may not be the time to retire Yenta the Matchmaker's modern-day counterparts. The shidduch system still brings about marriage in a community where guys and girls don't usually get to know each other on their own. And that need is still very strong. For independent sources, I'm Rachel Geizhals.
When we come back, we'll look in on a Spanish-language television station that's outlasted many competitors.
You promised me the world. Is this what you had in mind?
Help EarthShare and its members restore balance to the world.
Visit earthshare.org and see what you can do. EarthShare, one environment, one simple way to care for it.
Finally tonight, when you think about television stations offering public affairs programming here in New York City, WNET and of course CUNY TV may come to mind. But there's another channel that's been around for more than 20 years. HITN operates out of the Brooklyn Navy Yards and was started by José Luis Rodríguez. We sent producer Anjanette Levert out to learn more about HITN and the man who started it all.
HITN TV is not just another Spanish television network.
This is HITN, the Hispanic Institute Telecommunications Network. Reaching 33 million homes in the United States and Puerto Rico, HITN TV considers itself to be the first and only non-commercial Spanish language network in the country, as well as the only one owned and controlled by U.S. Latinos. And this man signing checks is José Luis Rodríguez, the founder and CEO.
So we want Latinos here to be part of the American society. We want them to contribute to the American society, and therefore they need to learn not only the language, but they need to learn how to navigate the new society.
Rodríguez took a curious path into television, having spent more than 25 years in education. Then he became a Spanish language book publisher and distributor. But in the early 80s, while his publishing business was failing, he became interested in the telecommunications industry and decided to attend a conference to learn more.
There was a lot of friends that I met in that conference felt that they wanted to make a lot of money. And since I didn't have any money, I tried to figure out how I can get in here, because this is what I want to do, this is what I like, this is where I can combine education and reach out more people using the benefits of new technologies.
But it would be 7 years before the television station would launch.
Roberto.
Now, more than 20 years into the business, Rodríguez has seen competitors come and go.
Being able to survive when other people, you see other people starting and not being able to make it, give you a great deal of satisfaction, not because other people they make it, it's because you are still standing. And I guess it's a validation that you must be doing something right.
With a community-based IP network, online presence, and cable station, Rodríguez is leading HITN towards a future as a new media network, where it will continue to inspire Latinos to participate and succeed in the United States.
HITN, educating, enriching, and motivating the Hispanic community.
Anjanette Levert for Independent Sources.
Well, that's our show for the season. We hope you've enjoyed the stories we brought you as much as we enjoyed covering them. And of course, you can still see past episodes of Independent Sources all summer long at the same time.
We hope you'll tune in when we return in the fall with a new season of profiles, issues, and interviews. So until then, be independent-minded.